The U.S. military has dropped the largest non-nuclear bomb ever deployed in combat, reportedly killing 36 Islamic State militants in Afghanistan and destroying their base. Why is the mother of all bombs being used, and what signals, if any, does the U.S. want to send out? And after the Netherlands spends over $7 million building a luxurious panda house, we'll be asking, what has panda diplomacy done for the protection of the species? Welcome to The Point. I'm Li Xin. The U.S. military on Thursday dropped the mother of all bombs, or MOAMs, targeting an Islamic State complex in the Achin district of Nangarhar province in Afghanistan. It is the largest non-nuclear bomb ever deployed in combat by the U.S. The Afghan Defense Ministry says the bomb killed 36 Islamic State militants and destroyed their base. Why is the MOAM being used, and what signals, if any, does the U.S. want to send out? Joining me on these two topics on this topic is Professor Christopher Chambers from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., Mr. Adnan Zulfikar from Philadelphia, a Sharswood Fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and Mr. Zhao Tong, Fellow at the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Professor Chambers, what do you think is the reason behind the U.S. administration's deployment of this mother of all bombs? Some people are saying it is the right weapon for the right target, whereas others are calling it taking a spear to kill a fly.
Well, from a public relations and media point of view, it's probably all of those things. It serves a military purpose. That bomb has been there for a while. They were just looking for some kind of hard target to use it to its capability, but it's also a public relations tool for domestic consumption. Americans have a very morbid, almost sports-like appetite for military technology and this kind of big boom kind of a thing. And it does send a message to other countries, including North Korea. Is a tool of the administration, of the Trump administration, to show, hey, we can project this power. So it's a lot of different things, including a military tool. It's a public relations tool, a political tool, both domestically and in terms of foreign policy.
Professor Zulfikar, according to the NATO, however, the Islamic State group's strength in Afghanistan has already fallen to 800 fighters from some 3,000 in early 2016, meaning that their campaign, what they were using to kill these fighters, has been effective. So what does this bombing sound like in your eyes? Is this the right weapon for the right targeters, or is it really a political and publicity tool?
Well, I think what Chris is quite accurate in terms of there is a domestic piece to this. There's a sort of projection of power. I do think that one of the, although ISIS has been decimated to a fair degree in Afghanistan, one of the issues is that this network of tunnels in Achin, in the mountainous region of Nangarhar, one of the issues is that this has existed for a while. Al-Qaeda has used it. It's used as a drug smuggling route, and they have struggled to actually have any impact with the bombs that they've been dropping on that area for a while now. So in some respects, they're potentially, along with the Afghan government, looking for a solution as a sort of bunker buster, if you will, to deal with this tunnel network. That could be one strategic goal that they had here. But overall, it does seem like they're trying to really stamp out ISIS, trying to send a message to sort of other groups in that arena, and potentially a global message, along with, I think, both the domestic consumption and, it seems, for some of the individuals involved in the new administration, their fascination with military technology.
Mr. Zhao, how do you look at the deployment of this weapon from your perspective? Do you think it was really necessary to use this bomb to kill 36, let's say, using a 10-ton bomb to achieve the goal of killing 36 IS fighters?
Well, there is the trend in the Trump administration, which is Mr. Trump is paying less attention to the specifics on military operations. He's asking less questions compared to President Obama about, for example, consequences of specific military operations, possible collateral damages or international repercussions of the operations. Therefore, the military is basically cut loose, and they have more leeway to decide what military operations to conduct. And I think that's one important domestic mechanism there. But internationally, according to some report, the director of American CIA recently said the bomb is meant to send a message to Iran, which is building ballistic missiles and is also, according to American allegations, supporting some regional terrorist organizations. But more important, I think everyone is speculating that the bomb is also served as a message to North Korea, which, according to satellite image analysis, is ready to conduct another nuclear test and is also working on to build an ICBM capability as well as programs to send another satellite into the outer space.
Mr. Chambers, how do you look at the kind of division within the Trump administration on military strategies, such as the one that is being considered in Afghanistan? For instance, it is said that the more hawkish sides are supporting this kind of tactic of using more weapons or more powerful weapons to bomb Afghanistan, whereas it is said that the pro that Bannon seemed to be opposite against this idea. What do you think of this kind of a changing or a debate that is going on within the Trump administration?
Well, it's when you look at it from afar, it seems like a very simple kind of back and forth between these two camps in the White House. It's infinitely more complex than that, because you do have two former generals, McMaster and Mattis, National Security Advisor and the Defense Secretary, who do want the military to have more leeway, but they're also very measured, very calculating men. They're they have a very scientific approach. So it's almost scientific aggression. That sounds kind of contradictory, but they have a very measured, calculated way of going about it. But the overall strategy is a more aggressive strategy, not only towards ISIS, but towards other perceived enemies of the United States. So it's basically them using their expertise to funnel all of this kind of what you've heard of basically bravado and very nationalistic tendencies within the White House. They're trying to have basically a more scientific approach to that. That seems to be a more complex view of what's going on rather than two camps basically warring against each other in the West Wing.
Mr. Zulfikar, how do you look at the deployment of this weapon to the impact of this deployment on the U.S.'s fight in Afghanistan against the IS targets? Do you think this indicates a shift in the U.S. strategy, or this is like another one-off attack like what they did in Syria?
Well, I think, one thing we have to do in all of this is try to maintain some perspective with regard to this administration and what happened previously. The reality is, yes, the Trump administration has a lot more sort of bravado. Their sort of public pronouncements seem to suggest this machismo, aggression, etc. But let's not forget that the Obama administration dropped over 26,000 bombs in 2016, which was up from about 3,000 more than they dropped in 2015. They carried out 10 times more drone strikes than the George Bush administration did before them. So it's not as though the Obama administration was not very aggressive in this space and not sort of posturing themselves militarily around the world, including in Afghanistan. So in some respects, I see this as a continuation of that policy. I think the consideration of using this bomb had actually begun during the Obama administration as well. What you're seeing is potential signaling here where this administration might seems to be a little bit less predictable than the Obama administration, but they also are much more in the public eye than the Obama administration was, where the media just simply was not covering these things at that time.
Mr. Zhao, Saturday marks the 105th birthday anniversary of Kim Il-sung of the People's Republic of Korea. Now, many people are seeing Saturday as a very dangerous day. How do you look at? Do you think the dropping of this bomb sends a very provocative signal to the DPRK?
Well, I do think so. Together with this drop of the mother of all bombs, with the previous airstrike against Syria, as well as with the recent deployment of another aircraft carrier battle group to the Western Pacific, close to the Korean Peninsula. Also together with the deployment of American nuclear attack submarine, which has a lot of cruise missiles that can be used to strike North Korea. I think this sends a serious message to North Korea. And also, President Trump said that if, according to NBC report, that if North Korea conducts another nuclear test, there is going to be military consequences. So I think that's it's a strong message.
As Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that once a war really happens, nobody will be winner. Let's listen to this first.
We call upon all the parties, no matter orally or in action, to stop provoking and threatening each other, and not to make the situation irretrievable and out of control. The ways of resuming talks can be flexible. As long as dialogues take place, they can be official or unofficial. They can be through one channel or dual channels. They can be bilateral or multilateral. China is willing to give support to all of them.
Professor Chambers, Mr. Wang Yi also said if anyone would launch war on the Korean Peninsula, he would have to shoulder historic responsibility. How do you look at the strong rhetoric of coming from the Chinese foreign minister at this particular moment?
Well, the Chinese foreign minister is trying to be, I guess the analogy would be a referee in a boxing match that hasn't occurred yet. Basically trying to quell and keep the potential for, not the potential for violence, but the potential for mistakes to be made. Because you have in the DPRK a very idiosyncratic leader, in the United States you have a very idiosyncratic leader. And the possibility for mistakes and misunderstanding to escalate is probably worse than the possibility than the military posturing, just a strike group or positioning the submarines or putting ground troops in the south. When the south has gone through, we might want to note that in Seoul, I mean, there's been a lot of political strife in terms of the leadership there, with the president being impeached. So you have a lot of possibilities for mistakes being made, and I think the Chinese foreign minister is basically trying to say, look, we can't stop the United States or DPRK from military buildup, but we can stop the rhetoric and we can maybe cool things down so we can talk. So it's a very mature approach. Will it work? I don't know, because there's responsibilities on everybody, including China.
Yes, let's wait and see. Saturday is right around the corner. Another issue I want to touch upon is the suspected chemical gas attack in Syria that happened on April the 4th. Now, the US and Russia are still in a kind of standoff as to who should be responsible and how an investigation should be conducted. At the same time, an alternative media organization, Global Research, based in North America, has produced extensive evidence that suggests the Syrian government has almost certainly not been using chemical weapons on its own people, and it's quite likely that the opposition forces murdered the victims and shifted the blame. Gentlemen, tell me, what is your reaction? Do you think such information is credible, and how we should look at it? Mr. Zhao, please.
Well, I mean, there are really controversial evidence. The U.S. government, in a very bold step, recently released its own intelligence by national technical means to even pinpoint the specific Tu-22 fighter jet used by the Syrian forces to drop the bomb. But after many other independent analyses showing that the evidence really points to another way, there is no conclusion regarding who is the real culprit. After Secretary of State Tillerson met with President Putin, he said the two countries have fundamentally different views on the basic facts. So it's really hard to tell. But the important thing is we need to rely on the legitimate international organizations, such as the Organization for the Proliferation of Chemical Weapons, who should play a role in leading a comprehensive investigation. And based on that, I think UN needs to exercise authority to decide what to go next.
Mr. Zulfikar, what is your take on this?
Listen, I've been following the Syrian conflict for over 6 years. I lived in Syria for many years as well. The global research, unfortunately, I've taken a look at that, their research, and it's actually not very convincing at all. If you look at what is being produced in, through other outlets, what we have from video evidence, from reporters on the ground, journalists, the overwhelming evidence here suggests that this was carried out by the Syrian regime or another air force that's operating in the region. We have to bear in mind here that the same thing happened in 2013, and very shortly after, prior to 2013, the Assad regime was telling us they didn't have any chemical weapons, they don't have it, they don't, and then suddenly after 2013, when there was a threat of a military attack in response to this red line, they're turning over all their chemical weapons. Subsequent to that, we have had multiple occasions of chlorine glass attacks. We've had that documented over and over. That report in Global Research only looks at a few things here and there. I think there is substantial evidence here the international community has not acted the way that they need to. Russia, which has its air force and military operating in this space, and is now supporting a Syrian regime that has killed over 94% of the civilians that have been killed in the country have been done by the Syrian regime. I mean, I think there needs to be some international accountability, and if this attack on, in response to the chemical weapons spurs that conversation, then it could potentially be a good thing.
Yes, Mr. Chambers, let me ask you this. I mean, Russia is not saying that Assad did not do this, but is calling for an investigation that's represented by experts from a wider geopolitical basis. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with saying, let's not make a conclusion at this moment, let's wait for the result of investigation?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with an independent confirmation and verification. However, I do agree that when you look at the totality of facts and the context and the history, I don't think the conclusion is going to be any different than that this probably was carried out by the Assad regime. I think the problem we need to look at going forward is how the parties can resolve this and what the relationship that between Russia and Assad is going to have to be, considering that there has been a cozy relationship between the Trump administration and Russia, and it's put a terrible burden on the Trump administration to react to this. So it's almost that Donald Trump distrusted our intelligence services. Now he has to trust them on this, and it's really the more interesting point is how this twists things around in terms of his relationship with Putin, not necessarily the Assad regime's relationship with Putin.
Yes, Mr. Zhao, your final take here.
Well, I think we have to recognize that the procedural justice is really important here, and it's certainly a grave mistake by the U.S. president to authorize a military strike against another sovereign country, another member of the UN, before any international investigation draws definitive conclusions.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us from different parts of the world. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this for our second discussion on panda diplomacy. Stay with me. The giant panda is a national treasure of China. They're adored by people around the world. They're often used as goodwill ambassadors, promoting friendship between China and other countries. This week, a pair of Chinese panda cubs arrived in the Netherlands for joint research and breeding for 15 years. The Dutch zoo has invested more than $7 million to build a luxurious panda house for them. Besides the Netherlands, China has cooperated with other zoos in different countries, including the US, the UK, and Japan, to allow people in different places to get a chance to meet the cute Chinese bears. However, some people claim that panda diplomacy is being used by China as a bargaining chip. So what is the true role of the panda, and has panda diplomacy contributed to the protection of the species? For more insight, I'm joined by Mr. Zhao Zhonghua, Country Director of World Animal Protection in China, and Victor Gao, Global Counselor of Asia Society. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Mr. Gao, let me come to you first. Now, panda diplomacy started in the 1950s when China sent pandas abroad as free gifts. However, with a decline in panda numbers, the Chinese government has changed its approach. Now China is usually offering a pair of pandas to other countries for 10 years of scientific research and breeding, and charges a fee of $1 million for each year. What are the considerations behind this arrangement?
Well, first of all, I am a lover of panda, and I think universally almost everyone in the world loves panda. Panda is really a great animal and a great friend of mankind. Now, panda is unique. It's only indigenous to China, to a very small part of China, and panda only eats bamboo and bamboo shells. So, in a sense, panda is truly a living fossil in a sense. And I think how to preserve panda, but also how to allow more and more people in different parts of the world to really look at this wonderful animal, I think that is a challenge. The Chinese way of dealing with these wonderful animals is to do the preservation at home, but also encourage as many countries in the world as possible to join in this great assignment and great excitement. So I think the current policy of loaning a pair of pandas to one particular country and then to another particular country, allow them to do the breeding of the pandas, but the newborn panda babies will eventually need to come back to China, etc. This is a very complicated and very sophisticated way of preserving panda, but also allowing more people to enjoy that. It may not be a perfect system, but I think this system works, and it generates huge amount of excitement for people in different parts to enjoy this wonderful animal, and I think this is a tradition that needs to go on.
Mr. Zhao, let me come to you from an animal protectionist perspective. How do you look at such arrangements? I mean, of course, China is charging for some money, but the total amount of money China has, let's say, received so far falls short of the kind of investment, actually far shorter than the kind of investment China puts in doing panda breeding. What is your take on this issue?
Well, I think the panda diplomacy, in terms of raise people's awareness, raise international community's awareness to protect pandas, it's very effective and very helpful. However, in terms of protecting animals, it's not an ideal model. First, when the pandas were transported from country to country from a long way, they often got fear, distress, and when they leave the pairs, a lot of animal welfare issues. It's not an ideal model. And as you also mentioned, the actual money gained from the rent of the panda is very limited. It's a very small portion in terms of all the money invested in protect the pandas. So overall, I think the ideal model would be maybe the foreign countries can sponsor a natural reserve in the panda's natural habitat, for example. We can think of other alternatives.
Mr. Gao, now the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, has announced that the giant panda has been downgraded from endangered to vulnerable in 2016. Now the population of wild giant panda is more than 1,800, an increase of almost 1/5 in the decade up to 2014. How do you look at this achievement, and how do you think this has been possible?
Now, I think, first of all, in China, in the central government as well as the local governments, in the scientific research sector as a whole, and among the Chinese people, there is a great level of attention paid to preserving the panda and also to taking care of the panda. This is really very outstanding, and I think, as a Chinese national, I'm very proud of all the work put into this preservation work. Now, I think this explains why the total number of wild pandas living in wilderness has not only not declined in the past years, but has been actually on the rise. And this is really good news. This is good news not only to us, the panda lovers, but it is really a good news to mankind as a whole, to the human race as a species. And I think this needs to be continued going forward. And I would say that the more people in different parts of the world who want to do and join in the preservation work for the panda, the better. On the other hand, I still believe that people in different cities in the world, in Europe, in Americas, in Japan, in Singapore, for example, they also want to have a look at panda at close range. They do not need to travel all the way to Sichuan province in China just to have a chance to look at the wild pandas.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of international cooperation, rotating pandas to different zoos in different cities in different parts of the world should be kept as a good tradition so that more and more people can look at this wonderful animal.
Mr. Zhao, finally, China plans to build a giant panda national park spanning 3 provinces to help the animals mingle and enrich their gene pool. The park is 3 times the size of America's Yellowstone National Park. What will it bring to the conservation of wild pandas?
Oh, yes, I have actually read the plan. I think it's a fantastic plan because when China protects the natural habitat of the pandas, it protects the whole ecological system, so not only pandas and other animals can benefit from it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zhao and Mr. Gao, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We have to leave it there. Now, here is my last point. Criticism can be a good thing when it makes you sit back and think about whether or not what you have done is good and what you can do better. In the case of the benefits that panda diplomacy brings to panda welfare, China has also learned from criticism in the past and slowly come up with better practices to protect panda welfare while enabling people around the world to appreciate this lovely animal. That's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xing, here on CGTN. Thank you for watching. I'll see you on Monday at the same time.